Right, okay. Well, welcome everybody. This is the the Royal Statistical Society's Professional Statistician Forum on Excellence in Official Statistics, Engagement, Insight and Building Trust. So I'm Andy Sutherland and I'll be chairing the meeting. And myself and the speakers are at the Royal Statistical Society's offices in London. So the RSS Official Statistics Awards, which are jointly awarded by the RSS and the UK Statistics Authority, are there to recognise and celebrate developments in official statistics, and they've been running now for a few years. And in this meeting you're going to hear from the winners, which are the Scottish Government, and those shortlisted for the 2017 awards. The 2018 awards, the process is ongoing at the moment. I think applications have closed, but the awards haven't yet been made. And the speakers are going to talk us through the motivation for the work, how it was done, key outcomes, how things have developed, and their take on the work. We've got an excellent programme with 5 speakers actually. We've got Ali McAlpine from the Scottish Government, Laura Watson-Hurd and Mark Burley from the DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, Ian Polanowski from the Health and Safety Executive, and Rob Green from I'll try and get this right, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government.
Correct.
Which has recently changed its name, or re-somethinged from what was DCLG. I hope you enjoy the meeting. We'll run through all the talks. If there's a particular if you want to ask a question, you can type it in the conversation box, which should be visible on your screen. I will probably take most of the questions at the end, unless there's something very specific that comes up, because that way we'll make sure that we get the timing run through. Our first speaker this afternoon is Ali McAlpine from the Scottish Government. Ali's a senior statistician in agricultural statistics these days, although he was working on deprivation when this piece of work was done, and he's been in the GSS for about 5 years, and prior to that he worked for the police as a performance manager. So if I could ask Ali if he could present his talk, please.
Certainly. Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. Let me know if you can't. I'm just going to go through some slides, and there's not really any words in these slides. It's all just pictures, and that's very deliberate. And as I go through it, you'll probably understand why we've kind of gone for that approach and why I feel that sort of presentation works. And I think that's the important thing that I find working with statistics in the Scottish Government, is the fact that we spend so much time on doing the analysis, on doing the statistical methodology, and we spend very little time in the publication. It's almost seen as a kind of afterthought. And so what we really did was we turned that on its head and devoted quite a lot of time to the presentation. There's a number of reasons why we did that. I should point out, yeah, I did work for the police, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, but this is actually a second career for me. My first career was as a chef, although I think a glorified microwave technician would be a better analogy for that job. I worked a lot of long hour shifts, 10 till 10s, 12 till 12s. We called them AFDs. I'll let you work out what the F stood for. But I struggled. It was a low income. And one night I came home, got young kids, and I'm coming home from a long day's work. I'm coming into the house, take off my boots, my feet are aching, and I will go to turn and hit the light switch, and the lights don't come on. We're out of electricity, and I've got young kids, as I said, and they all had mega blocks, and I don't know if you know what mega blocks are, but it's basically Lego, large Lego, a bit sharper though. And if you stand on one of these, it's like standing on nails. And so got no electricity, we've ran out of electricity. I've hit the emergency button and found out that we've ran out of emergency credit in the electricity as well. So I'm going to have to get my way through the living room to my bedroom without standing in one of these mega blocks, and it was a nightmare, because you can't just buy electricity at 10 o'clock at night anywhere. It's a 50-mile round trip if you want to do that. So I stepped in a few blocks. I used that F word a few times as I did that and getting into my bed, and then lay there and thought, right, I need to do something. I need to do something better than this. And really, I think, coming from a point where I've been on low income, living in a council flat, I understood what the problems were with deprivation. And I also was very frustrated with the solutions that I saw around about me being put in place, because I lived in a place called Stirling, in Cornton actually, and these are what it looks like now. It's all these kind of modern houses. But what I lived in was a flat, and they were demolishing all the flats, and they were building these new houses, and the council were saying, this will solve all the problems. And from where I was sitting, I was thinking, well, a new house isn't going to solve my problems. The problems are rooted in low income, lack of employment opportunities. For a lot of people, it's education's not, don't have a great education. And at that point in time, I didn't have a great education. And there's a lot of good people living in deprived areas. The woman at the top of the flats, she had 3 jobs, working at 5 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and then going back out at 6 o'clock at night, working 3 jobs to support her kids and seeing that the kids also go to school. So there's good work ethic there. And I think that the thing that I'm trying to get across here is the fact that deprived areas are often downbeaten, and people see deprivation as being a bad thing, and it isn't a great thing, but the people who live there are not bad. So I've managed to get myself off to university. I was supported through university by my parents, and I was lucky, and I had that opportunity to do that because we had a bit of wealth behind us, but not everybody that I was living beside had the same opportunities. And when I moved to working in the police, I looked at SIMD, and it was the first time I'd come across it. I thought, this is great. I can do some analysis with this, and looked at proactive policing projects that were going on at the time. And guess what? They were all rooted in deprived areas. There was no policing projects in the wealthy areas. And as a statistician, I always think a normal distribution says that there's going to be some criminals living in wealthy areas as well. But I used SIMD, but my problem with working with SIMD was it was like going through the Encyclopedia Britannica. It was mountains of analysis, not really enabling me to be able to go and do the sort of statistical work if I didn't have a statistical background and a maths degree. So that was the kind of starting point when I joined Scottish Government. I won the lottery, got SIMD. I thought, yeah, here we go. We've got some evidence. I can start using this. I can maybe influence policy making and stop them just building houses and start thinking about what else we can do. So when I moved into SIMD, we went out and spoke to the people who were, we went and spoke to our users, and we invited them to forums over a 3-week period, and we had 200 people turn up from third sector, social enterprises, local charities, local councillors, local council, and just interested people that wanted to do something about deprivation. And what they kept telling us was that SIMD was just full of negative indicators. My first thought was, of course it's full of negative indicators, it's deprivation. There's not much positive to look at. But what they were telling me was that SIMD was just a stick to beat these deprived areas with, because every time we publish SIMD, the local newspapers will say, look at these, here's the most deprived area in this area. And I guarantee the BBC News will turn up at Fergusley Park in Paisley and say, here's the most deprived area in Scotland. But what I knew that SIMD could do was actually show you some of the issues behind that, because we collect statistics on income, employment, health, education, and housing, and crime. And what I saw was a wealth of evidence that could be used to entice funding, to entice resources. So instead of being a stick to beat deprived areas with, it should have been a stick to hook a carrot on the end of to get people in to help support these deprived areas. So that was the starting point, speaking to the users and seeing through the kind of first stages of what they were telling us was wrong. The second thing was, well, if we've listened to them, we're going to change our publication. So instead of having this 150-page report of analysis, what we'll do is we'll condense that down into an 18-page leaflet that just shows you the power of SIMD, and that deprived areas aren't bad, but the SIMD can highlight what the particular issues in a certain area. But we also need to empower people to be able to use that data. So how did we do that? Well, we looked for best practice. And what we did was we found University College of London do what's called data shine mapping. They're actually very good maps at a very, very reasonable price. And they had already done this for the census in England and Wales. They'd recently done it for the census in Scotland, and we thought that this worked well. It gave users an easy way to get into the data instead of tables and tables of Excel spreadsheets that were difficult to interpret. This mapping made it much easier to grab a screenshot of the map or download the data for a selected area. And the fact the map was so good that we spoke to the BBC after we published the statistics, and the BBC had thought that they were going to develop their own mapping, and then we released this map with the SIMD 2012 data before the 2016 data was published. When we published the 2012 data, the BBC looked at these maps and thought, well, we don't need to do maps, we just need to screenshot them and put them on our website, and that's exactly what they did. And we also prepared the media for other things as well. We gave them access to the spreadsheets that we were going to publish the SIMD data in. We didn't publish the data, we just published the structure of the data sets. And so 15 minutes after we published it, 9:45, 15 minutes after we'd actually published, all of a sudden on the BBC website, up came these tables that were showing more than just the most deprived area in each area. It was showing where things had got better and where things had maybe got worse. And so there was a bit more evidence going on about it. And then when we got the 6 o'clock news, the journalists were walking through the streets of Fergusley Park with people being interviewed and saying that, well, I don't feel deprived. But the other thing that the journalists did was they regurgitated what we had put down in our publication, word for word almost, and chapter for chapter, and we got a lot of coverage. Why does that matter? Well, that matters because policy people started listening to us. Policy people started seeing that there was power in this evidence. And just after I published SIMD, I was invited to go and speak to Fergusley Park. And I went down there and the local council spoke to us and they said, we don't understand why we're still the most deprived areas. We've knocked down all these old houses, we've built new houses, and why have we not fixed the problems? And all of a sudden I had the evidence to show them, well, it's more than just housing. It's more rooted in income and employment and lack of education and lack of opportunities. So we were able to move on the conversation, and we're still moving on the conversation. In fact, yesterday, one of a former employee in the SIMD team, Jennifer Knoll, has won an award yesterday. Well, runner-up. She didn't quite win the award. Unfortunately, we can't win all the awards. But she did some work as well, not just looking at the most urban areas, but also some of the sparsest populated areas such as Orkney. And using SIMD with a wealth of other open source data, we were able to show where children were most likely to be at risk of material deprivation or in poverty within Orkney, which was a huge step forward, because before that the conversation had always been about SIMD not looking at rural areas as well as it does urban areas. So we were able to prove that. So the conversation keeps going on. I now work for agricultural statistics. I'm trying to do the same thing again. I'm trying to make our statistics more easily accessible by policy people, by other activists, and not just government, outside of government as well. So thank you very much for listening to me. I hope that was entertaining. I hope it gave you some thoughts, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or pass on to the next presenter.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks very much, Ali. That was really interesting and quite inspiring about how you've sort of drawn on your past experiences to bring it into your current work and taking that forward. What I'll do, I'll take some questions at the end of the presentation, so I'll address some general questions to each of you, and pick up anything that we've that's come through on the screen. So if people put any questions they have onto the screen, then through the conversation box, then we'll pick those up. So our next speakers we got a bonus double act from the Department of Work and Pensions. Laura Watson-Hurd and Mark Burley. Laura has worked for the GSS for about 9 years. She's currently head of client statistics and was previously a researcher for a local council. And Mark has worked for the GSS for about 11 years, and he's the central statistics team leader. He used to be an engineer and has done another one with a major career change in the past. Laura and Mark are going to talk about the improving public access to statistics and user engagement. There's also a DWP item on something called the data packs, which we aren't going to be covering within the meeting today, but there are some slides, a couple of slides, which will be present on the website. So if you want to know about that, you can look there. Anyway, without further ado, I shall pass on to Laura and Mark.
Thank you very much. Yes, so Mark and I are here today to tell you a bit more about how over at DWP we've worked better to understand the needs of our users of our statistical outputs, and how we've made changes to the outputs following this evidence. So over the next few minutes we're going to cover how we gained the evidence from our users, what action we took, including our layered approach to releasing statistics, how we developed our visualisations, the challenges we faced in doing so, and our plans and next steps. So just to set the scene a little bit more, in DWP we publish around 180 statistical publications per year. And last year we had about 500,000 visits to our stats pages. In our area, in client stats, we publish our statistics based largely on administrative data, and they cover a full range of core DWP business supporting vulnerable people and the payment of benefits. So how have we been better understanding our users' needs? We decided last year to take some targeted research with our users to inform further developments of our gov.uk pages and Stat Explore. In particular, we wanted to know how we could make them better to allow users to find what they were looking for. So we decided to run a series of user testing sessions. For example, one of these was where we had 12 volunteers and we asked them to complete a number of information retrieval tasks. So for example, we asked them to find how many people were receiving job seekers allowance, when the next universal credit stats were going to be published, and how many children were living in low income households. So using some specialist equipment, we were able to record participants' on-screen actions and their facial responses. And we also encouraged them to think out loud and talk through what they were doing and why. The outcomes were quite varied. So whilst we had some people who found the information straight away, we did have some cases where people struggled and said that it wasn't that obvious and that they felt overwhelmed by what they were presented with. Overall, the findings showed that it took an average of 8 to 9 clicks to find the requested information. However, if they had followed the shortest path, they could have found it in less than 4. As a result, we've used this evidence and we've started to identify and prioritise improvements to our statistics. For example, we've introduced a new theme-based approach for finding statistics alongside the existing search options. Alongside this, we were also able to draw parallels in the feedback to the ONS user types. So we found that we had users that represented the inquiring citizen, so they wanted simple worded high-level summaries. We had information foragers who wanted just enough information to make informed decisions. And we had expert users who wanted to create their own data and have it in a format that suited them. On that basis, over in DWP, we've developed a layered approach to releasing our statistics. So one of the key deliverables was our statistical first release template. So this is a simple PDF document with short key headlines on the first page, and we like to use lots of visuals. So you'll see here that I think this is taken from our UC Stats publication, and we've got 3 key charts outlining the direction of our 3 key measures for UC. These are really good for our inquiring citizens. We then follow that up with Excel tables, and then with more detail we provide StatExplore, our online web tool. This is really good for our expert users that want to get information they need in a format that they want. So here they can customize their own tables, maps, charts, and even use the API. It's also really good for us because we can use it in PQs and FOIs quite easily. We've then followed that up by exploring our visualization tools. So we've got here our interactive maps, which allow our users to drill down to local area level. And we've also recently progressed our interactive visualizations, so the dashboards that can allow people to point and click and drill down to their stats of interest. These last 2 are better suited to our information foragers who just want enough information to make decisions. So I'm just going to hand over to Mark now, who's going to talk you through a bit more about how we created those interactive visualizations.
Right, thanks Laura. So yeah, how did we create our interactive visualization? So the first thing we wanted to do was develop a sort of standard template, so similar to the one Laura mentioned that we do for our static publications. We did this using a combination of HTML to control the sort of content and structure, and also CSS to control the sort of styling and layout of our web pages. This has allowed us to sort of have quite a consistent look, so things like fonts, colours, branding, that sort of thing were able to be sort of quite consistent. And it also made the sort of dashboards quite reusable, so we might put different data in, but the look and feel were already set up, so that saved a lot of time in that respect. Initially, the data that we used to sort of populate the dashboards was quite hard coded, so quite a manual process. So we're putting the data into JSON format, and yeah, quite sort of labour intensive. And once we got the data into the dashboards, we were able to sort of use things like D3 and C3 and jQuery to sort of manipulate that data. So D3 is an open source JavaScript library which essentially binds data to objects, so things like charts, maps and things like that. And it also allows you to sort of dynamically change things, so you can do things like update the colours on a map depending on a certain data value. You can sort of do transitions over time, so dynamically change the sort of charts or maps or the visualizations depending on your data that sits behind that. And we also use C3, which is a D3 based reusable chart library. This allows you to create some of the sort of main charts, line charts, bar charts, things like that, and sort of don't require a lot of coding sort of knowledge, so quite easy to pick up if you come into this sort of quite new as we were. And yeah, it's quite quick and easy to sort of get charts and actually get something that's actually usable. I mentioned about the sort of manual input of the data. We've now started to move towards using the Stat Explorer API to feed the data directly into the dashboards. So again, that's sort of cut down for us in terms of resource and also human error and things like that. It also allows us to put dashboards up there, and once the data is updated on Stat Explorer, those dashboards automatically update. And I think we're going to try and do a quick sort of demo of one of our dashboards. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah, so this dashboard is one of our publications on national insurance number registrations to adult overseas nationals entering the UK. So just a bit of background, and a national insurance number is needed if somebody wants to come and work in the country or claim benefit. So it's been one of our sort of more high profile publications, particularly obviously over the last couple of years. So this visualisation shows a map of the world which shows which country people came from to register in the UK, and also on the right we've got a GB map there, so where did they come to live, so where did they come from and where did they go to essentially. So I think if we can highlight, we've got Romania there. I think we were trying to click on Romania. Yeah, that one. So yeah, we've got the map there which shows obviously how many people have registered in Romania. We can split that down by different years. We can show that as a time series. We can show where people are coming to live when they come to this country from Romania. It looks like the majority is probably as expected of London and the South East. But it does allow us to draw, because there's quite a lot of data that sits behind this, draw different stories and pull that out of the sort of map and allow sort of users to sort of play around with that data. And it's probably things that we wouldn't be able to get by just looking at tables. So drawing different stories and different sort of interpretations out of the data that you wouldn't normally get from sort of other means. Could we try and go back to the presentation? Right. Yeah, so one of the reasons we want to start creating dashboards is to make our stats more accessible on a variety of different devices. So some of the feedback we've got from users is people weren't only wanted to access our stats on a desktop, wanted to access things on a tablet or a mobile phone. So that's why we wanted to make the dashboards quite accessible. One of the things we use was Bootstrap, so something that were originally sort of developed by Twitter, and just allows you to sort of format your web pages so they're compatible with a variety of different devices. We've also looked at sort of accessibility needs as well and tried to make the dashboards as accessible as possible, things like making sure we've got the correct colours so people can view them if they're colourblind, or tooltips and things like that, as I said, to make things quite accessible. So yeah, what sort of challenges did we face? So quite a steep learning curve. Some of the sort of coding I mentioned earlier and the sort of web development side of things. The people that were looking at this were primarily sort of statisticians, so quite a steep learning curve in terms of sort of picking up those skills. A lot of online resources. I think probably over the last couple of years we've got more capability in the department, a lot of sort of data scientists and web developers, so we've also been able to learn from them as well. Yeah, I think the other challenge also has been sort of hosting, because some of the coding is not really compatible with putting this stuff out on gov.uk, so we've had to go onto a different platform. But this is something that we're currently working in with our sort of data engineers to make sure we conform to the sort of GDS gov.uk standards.
Okay. So you can see that we've done quite a bit already on our user engagement and reacting to that, but we're not stopping there. It's very much an area that we're continuing to explore and experiment with. In the last few months, we've begun to look at other options available to us to help us understand our evidence base further and influence our development work. So, for example, at the end of last year, we conducted a formal consultation on UC statistics, and that led to the commitment to the department to deliver a future release strategy. So we committed to delivering a certain set of statistics in the future. We've also been using Google Analytics and also been looking at our StatExplore user logs, and these are helping us to allow to see where we can make efficiencies, and we've already started to think about whether we can reduce some of the frequencies of publications. We're also using surveys to decide whether we need more training on StatExplore.
Yep, and just finally, just the next steps on transformation. I think Laura's mentioned some of the things that are continuing and looking to expand around the user testing. We're also looking to expand the dashboards and the visualization aspects, looking to do fully sort of interactive stats-based releases, so instead of putting them out in a static PDF document, making those sort of more interactive. And the other thing is sort of around efficiency as well. So we've got a project, reproducible analytical pipelines project, which is essentially trying to use things like R Markdown and things like that to automate the production of our stats, which frees up a lot of time for our statisticians to sort of concentrate on the more value-added things and picking the stories out of the data rather than sort of copying and pasting things into Excel documents and things like that, more of the sort of heavy lifting. So really, trying to automate that side of things. I think that's it.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to check, when are the links to those maps that you produced on the website, are they within the presentation, or can we pick those up from somewhere? Are they publicly available, those maps?
Yeah, I mean, the maps we've shown are publicly available, so yeah, happy to send on the link to that one, and we've also got some others as well.
Yeah, that might be useful actually, if we can find a way of putting, it might be that we can put them into the slide or something, so people can.
Yeah, we could have a reference slide in there.
And just so that people can pick those sort of things up. That's great. And UC, is that universal credit?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. I thought it might be somehow, but yeah. Okay, thanks very much indeed to Laura and to Mark. So I think we'll just move on then to the next presentation, which is from Ian Polanowski. Ian is a senior stats officer in the Health and Safety Executive, and he's worked in the GSS, the Government Statistical Service, for a bit over 4 years, prior to which he was a data analyst in a drug and alcohol rehab centre in Liverpool.
Yep. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the invite to talk to you today. Yes, very different sort of environment I work in now from when I was working in drug and alcohol rehab. For example, for the last 2 years, I have been the lead for designing our flagship summary booklet that goes along with our annual publication of the health and safety stats. And my presentation today will focus mainly on that, touching on some of the other aspects that go into that, and looking at the insight work that's been done that shaped that design, and then sort of walking you through our design process a little bit by reviewing what it looked like prior to this sort of insight work taking over, and how that's sort of led to the decisions that we've made and how it looks now. So, that being said, Health and Safety Stats is the single biggest project that HSE stat teams work on. It's an annual update to the vast majority of what we produce, and that includes some web-based summaries on our HSE's website, more detailed commentaries, a suite of tables, and as I mentioned, the focus of this, the flagship summary booklet, and that work very much underpins HSE's strategy and its policy work, while also providing us with a sort of a direct line to communicating directly with the general public. So one of the most important developments that we've seen across the GSS in recent years, and in many ways it's very comforting to see DWP colleagues reference these as well, has been the user personas. And again, similarly, we took these on board, and these were very much sort of the jumping off point for everything that went into our design work with this this rebuild of our products. So while the persona work continues to sort of develop across government and increasing in specificity with like sort of policy personas or individual departments working on their own one, we adopted the three that the initial ONS research came up with, which is the inquiring citizen, the information forage, and the expert analyst. And again, courtesy of the DWP colleagues, it means I don't have to dwell on the definitions of that, which is great news for me. But yeah, so the main booklet itself, we decided, given that that was sort of the most visible, we were very much going to target the sort of the inquiring citizen with that. And again, the sort of characterised as wanting sort of tell them a story rather than having to make them go and do their own analysis. The example I've always heard is forget about your debate regarding whether we should be using RPI or CPI. What does it mean for my pension? And that's very much how we think about sort of the inquiring citizen. So for this booklet, we wanted to be very sort of upfront with our messaging and speak with sort of authoritative tone about sort of the position on health and safety stats. In terms of the information foragers, we sort of cater to them with the HTML pages themselves, encouraging them to sort of, if they find something that they're particularly interested in, to go and do a little bit more of a deep dive, or laying out all the information sort of upfront. So if it's not something they're interested, they can move on and continue on the user journey that way. This also, we touched upon this with how we redesigned our suite of tables, and to sort of encourage that sort of data discovery and exploration. So there's a bunch of now, it's sort of filterable, and you can drill down into things, you can expand it back out. It's again, very simple change we made, but something that just improves that user experience for them. And again, it's that sort of highlighting what the pathways through our data is. In terms of the expert analysts, again, that's very much the sort of the suite of tables. They don't actually want me telling them anything. They want to be left alone to go and play with the data themselves for the most part. And this is where we get into what I think is most interesting about sort of the persona model, which is the fact that a user isn't fixed into one of these personas. They can transition between them. So the majority of our audience will be an expert analyst in the field that they do on a day-to-day job, but they might well be inquiring citizens when it comes to health and safety statistics. And I might well be the only one involved in this call that knows anything about health and safety statistics, or even cares about health and safety statistics. And that's fine, but it's that sort of recognition of you need to provide a pathway through your data for whoever your users are. So yeah, and by sort of embedding this way of thinking in these processes in the design process, and considering how we can better reach each part of our audience with whatever we're releasing, it's just a case of that's going to improve the impact that your release has as far as we're concerned. So that being said, I'll take you into the design process to see how we took these personas and sort of reviewed our existing products and the changes that we made as a result of that. So this is a page from our 14-15 version of the booklet, and it's concentrating on some of the more high-profile stats that we deal with in HSC, which is to do with injury statistics, in this case specifically fatal injuries. And the first process we did was take each element that goes into this page and review it in light of these personas, specifically the inquiring citizen. And the first thing we looked at was these change indicators. Now, this was possibly the most controversial thing we had to look at we got on this page, because these do have like potential as a communication tool. They're very clear, they're very visual. This was sort of formative in terms of moving towards a more visual approach. The problem we have with them is the potential to mislead, because what we established was relatively arbitrary sort of cut-offs of what change meant. I think in this case it was 2%. So if we look at this, it's a hypothetical series, but again it's a very sort of plausible one. The interpretation that those change indicators will give you depends very much on what period you're looking at. You end up with 3 different stories. I'd be hard pressed to describe this as anything other than sort of no change over time. It's a flat series, maybe with some fluctuation, but I would certainly be gun shy about describing anything in this as an increase or a decrease in terms of official statistics. And what happens when you're using those 3 indicators we did have is you have 3 different stories as opposed to one very clear one, and probably the most important one, which is this sort of long-term flatness of the trend. So that sort of embeds our first design principle that went into our booklet, which is the need for clear statistical storytelling while providing an authoritative view on the data and sort of the long-term trends. And as a result of that, those change indicators were dropped going forward. Next up for review was the inclusion of a table within these pages. And this was a very simple decision in many ways, because the format of this is currently PDF. It's embedded on our website, but it is a PDF document, which means that this table is not, you can't manipulate it, you can't easily copy it out. It's simply not good practice to have that there. The rule became, if you need a table, it should be in a suite of tables so people can go and explore it properly. And if you're just using the table as a tool to emphasize one or two given figures, then it needs to be its own headline, its own story. So the tables were very sort of quick to be binned. And then we finally considered the charting itself. This chart in particular highlighted a problem we were running into that was to do more with the constraints of the format we're working with. And that is sort of front-loading the information and trying to talk about all the relevant data points, because these are all very relative points, but there's an awful lot going on within this chart. These are elements that, if you're a non-specialist, which again this product was targeted at, these things might not be immediately sort of intuitive to you. There's two axes, for example. There's stacked bar charts that don't have an even base to allow comparison across time, and it's not an interactive, so you can't flip that series to see that. And again, presenting sort of absolute numbers alongside a rate, both very important stories, but presenting them together is potentially diluting the impact that any one element of this can have. And that sort of took our final design principle that charting needs to support that storytelling I was talking about, and as such they should be designed to focus on one element at a time and just have a little bit more sort of immediacy in terms of when you're looking at it and being able to understand it, which didn't leave us with an awful lot to play with. We still had these headlines, but even these headlines are showing an issue that the existing release in its previous form had, which is these headlines, though we're talking about fatal injuries, which is, you know, our primary source of that is something called the RIDDLE database, but injuries as a whole, there's a lot more that goes into that, and we were very much source-led rather than topic-led, so we weren't allowing complementary data sources to appear together and to give a sort of a better view of the area, if you like. So we decided that, well, there's no reason we shouldn't do that. We'll switch instead from being source-led to being topic-led. So as a result, this is what we ended up with the first year of our redesign. That's the injury page as it looks more or less now. We have changed some things since then, but this is the one that went forward to the award. And yeah, as you can hopefully see, we've got key figures sort of easily picked out along the left-hand side, and we've moved the sort of more in-depth text that was following some of the headline figures to the right-hand side, and we've got some of those clearer charts I was talking about. So if we just look at, as I say, the anatomy of the design and look at each element a little bit closer. So if we take these sort of the key figures, these are pulling out straightforward stories that simply convey the key message for the latest year. It also allows us to use information from the complementary sources I mentioned to provide the sort of topic area overview rather than sort of using a source as a dividing line. And in this example, there's two sources appearing here. We've got the Labour Force Survey, which is a self-reported measure of injury and ill health, and it's appearing alongside that RIDDLE data administrative source I talked about earlier. And throughout the booklet, these headlines are always figure-led and designed in such a way that if you were to read nothing else we released, if you would only read these headline figures, you would have a reasonable picture of what the health and safety position in the latest year was, or the latest available year, I should say, because some of them are lagging indicators. If you were to completely disregard anything else, they should be a good sort of jumping off point for you. The charts themselves, as I say, more focused, and they've adopted this sort of new style to make them a little bit more accessible. And this includes a change to how we talk about uncertainty. We've removed the more traditional sort of eye bars around our confidence intervals, and we've replaced it with that band of confidence, which you're seeing thankfully more and more these days amongst the statistics. But every element of this we consider, so the colour palette's been leveraged to improve communication. Each topic's now associated with a particular colour palette, so in this case injury is green, ill health appears as red. Our costs data is a sort of purple, and this is also supported by an icon that sits alongside this. They're used consistently across our outputs, so without tacitly saying green means injury and red means ill health, there's a visual cue to our audience whatever they're looking at, they've got sort of, they can begin to associate related topic areas together. And importantly, any differences between series is not based on sort of green versus red, which is absolutely terrible if you're colourblind. It's based on contrast and luminance, so it works if you are colourblind, it works if it's printed in black and white, which my notes in front of me are, so that's reassuring for me. and yeah, it's just about making it as accessible to as many people as possible. And then finally, you've got this sort of the commentary, and this is where we sort of highlight our commitment to simple storytelling, and also talk about long-term trends with that sort of clear, authoritative tone I've mentioned the need for. As well as that, this is where you can also see how we've created a path for people on the user journey. So you can see at the bottom there's this call out to find out the story behind the key figures. It's a very simple call to action that if you happen to be interested in what you're reading, it goes and takes you directly to the sort of the next step for you to find out a little bit more. And yet it also shows off another idea we were working on, which is each story needs to be self-contained, and it works if it's separated from the rest of the document. So it's great news for us because we will reuse these statements whenever we're talking about them, which means they're consistent across our products. Whenever we answer a question regarding what has happened amongst injury, this is where we'll dive into, and it will always be the same. And that ties back into that inquiring citizen's need for sort of one version of the truth, if you like, as much as we can say it's the truth. But certainly our best estimate, and it will be a consistent messaging across. And it's also handy if anyone else is reusing our data to be able to just pick out individual parts and be able to share them. And that shareability is, this was sort of an unintended but beneficial consequence of putting the user at the heart of what we were thinking about in terms of our design, because we went from thinking just about what a user's needs or desires would be from the official statistics, and also started thinking about how they might go on to use that content. So someone in the health and safety field, they might want to share a particularly interesting or impactful figure via their social media, for example, or a journalist may want to simply lift a chart because it's easier than them having to design one from the ground up themselves. And this is a sort of idea of modular design easily allows for that. So this is the first page you see when you open our booklet, and it shows off again that sort of the use of colour and the use of icons I was talking about. And this sort of, this modular design was important to our strategy of making information that can easily be shared. It ensures that our release, when it's out there in the wild, can be recognised as coming from HSE. It's got a distinct sort of look and feel to it, and it's sort of the official source. So it's a benefit to HSE because it's sort of enabling us to increase the visibility of our figures, but also a benefit to the public at large by allowing the sort of the official statistics, the hopefully accurate and authoritative information to sort of cut through the noise, because it is a competitive space once your figures are out in the wild. I know for one thing we've seen insurance companies and the like sort of repurpose our statistics, not necessarily in the most accurate of way, shall we say. So having something that's distinctly ours and can stand out from the crowd is really important to us. And of course, the point of the redesign was to better serve the public. So we actively sought out feedback once we'd set this live, and hopefully, as you've inferred from the fact that I'm allowed to speak to you today, that feedback was incredibly positive. And where it wasn't, we've taken that on board, and that's feeding into our subsequent design product, because it's a continuous improvement, and we continue to refine and develop both the summary booklet, because I'm still attached to that, and the rest of our release. So, sort of to sum up, if you like, we rebuilt our flagship publication with the user at the centre of our decision-making process. And doing so, we've created something that communicates clearly and with impact. One of the more sort of immediate impacts we've had is looking at sort of HSE's policy community. They've recently released their sort of health at work strategy, and our stats are right at the core of it. It's very much a case of visual, evidence-led decision-making, which is exactly what we want as a sort of statistician within government. We aim to simplify and just tell simple stories well, encourage users to explore the data rather than try and front-load every element that is of relevance to the data set. And we built a product that could be shared, and it looks and feels distinctive. It's essential, as I say, in that competitive space where it's important that the statistician's voice is heard first, it's heard loudest, and it carries the authority it needs to. So with that said, thank you very much. I know we're taking questions later, but if we don't get to any burning ones you've got from me, my details are on screen now.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Ian. We're just doing a bit of choreography, if you can imagine what's going in a room where people are swapping around in order to get in front of the laptops they're trying to present from. I'm just interested actually in, well, we might open this up later, but I'm just interested in the extent to which you feel that reducing what is a complex area, you're busy reducing the complexity of it. To what extent you end up getting better conclusions out of the other end of the system, because there's always a risk of people misunderstanding the statistics, because you've taken out all the lovely little bits and pieces that we love to put in, the caveats and the warnings.
The footnotes have been very much banished from the summary document. What you can't see from the pages that I've shared is that information does still sit within the booklet. There are still links to all of the relevant source information and everything else. And that is part of our user journey, it's part of our responsibility when we're designing these things to be sort of shared, is that it's important to know where it comes from and what sits in the background of that. So it's not a case that these are completely divorced from the complexity, if you like. It's just we're not front loading that and making it a sort of a requirement of understanding that you know how many households are surveyed in the labour force survey and anything like that. It's just not good enough to know it is from the labour force survey, and if you're interested in what that means, you can go and find it elsewhere. Okay,
that's great, thank you. So our final speaker this afternoon is Rob Green from MHCLG. Rob's worked in the Government Statistical Service for about 15 years, post-graduating.
Long time.
Sorry?
A long time.
Long time.
Yes.
Yeah. Does it feel long?
Well, it's still finding new challenges.
Yes, indeed. Yes, as you do.
Not hard to do.
And he's a senior implementation analyst, and he's going to talk about the live performance dashboard.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so I work for MHCLG. I can say that effectively now, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, formerly known as DCLG, and I'm going to be telling you about the online data dashboard, which we've been working on in the department for a couple of years now, and that it shows data and visualisations on key policy areas for the department, with the aim of driving further use of data and evidence within the department for policy teams and analytical teams to get all the data into one place and really make it easy for them to use key statistics. And at the moment the dashboard is for internal use only, but we're going to be looking into, unlike the other presentations we heard, but we're going to look into publishing it further, publishing it more widely in future. So I'll tell you a bit about where I work, which is the implementation unit part of MHCLG, and then the motivation for the dashboard, what it is. Then I'll tell you a bit about Open Data Communities, which is our open data platform which drives the dashboard, how the dashboard was created, the key outcomes of the dashboard, and then the next steps which we'll be looking to work on in the future. So I work for the implementation unit, which is part of the MHCLG, which reports to the exec team and ministers. Implementation units of there's one in the Cabinet Office which works with implementation units across government, which they exist in several departments, and they're there to try and drive better implementation of the ministerial priorities. And we have three main functions: tracking progress, where we create performance packs or try and streamline performance processes in the department, so we know that we're on track to meet our aims. Problem solving, where we on particular policy areas and programs, we undertake reviews and deep dive projects to try and unblock problems. Deep dives is like a methodology we use to do a 3-month project, which with like qualitative and quantitative analysis, and typically involves visits to local authorities and organisations to try and develop key recommendations for policy improvements, and then building capability, which is to try and increase the ability of the rest of the department to track progress and problem solve themselves. And that's where the dashboard fits in, that we wanted to build capability within the department to track performance. And so the motivation for the dashboard was that the executive team wanted the department to have easier access to data and visualizations for for department performance. So teams could use these in for their policy development in the presentations and reports, and to sort of just to make it as easy as possible, so policy colleagues don't have any excuse not to use the data to inform their work. Because I mean the housing data is produced by different departments. Quite a lot of it's produced by MHCLG, but some of it's produced by ONS. So it can be a bit of a minefield to find the data that you need. And and so the dashboard it tracks indicators on our single departmental plan objectives, covering the range of functions that the department has, which is such as fixing the broken housing market, which is probably the one that gets the most press coverage, growing local economies, building integrated communities, supporting effective local government, and also our response to the Grenfell Tower tragedy. And then we carry out work to try and prepare local government and local economies for EU exit. So, without further ado, what is the dashboard? So, shows these two visualisations of policy areas, gives you the options to download the data and snip charts from presentations, briefings and reports. It automatically updates itself from Open Data Communities, which is the department's open data platform, which I'll tell you a bit more about in a minute. And it's easily accessible from your desktop, laptop, or tablets or mobile phones. So it's been designed so it works on a tiny screen as well as a large one. And so now I'm going to try and show you the dashboard. Thanks, here we go. So here it is on the first page. You can see like some key indicators on each of the SDP areas. We've just covered 3 strategic objectives at the moment, and we'll try and cover more going forward. So for fixing the broken housing market, net additional dwellings is our key statistic, and you can see the figure for 2016, 17, and the yearly change, and affordable housing completions, planning permissions, and on the helping people now area, which also relates to housing, we've got homelessness figures, rough sleeping, and productivity stats for growing local economies, and high skilled unemployment. So, and it's interactive, so I can drill down to different areas and show trend lines and chloropleth maps, which show the geographic variation in house building and various elements, and so looking at helping people now, further statistics on housing access and experience, and then helping vulnerable people, which covers homelessness and related statistics. And have a look at within the site it's got source information and some information on like some footnotes in the statistics and describing its source, and then it's linked to the open data site where it comes from. And so the Open Data Communities is the department's open data platform, which provides data which is easily linkable for instance, for the for the online dashboard as we use it. So basically it publishes all the statistics that MHCLG publishes in open data formats with APIs, so developers can easily link to the data and extract it, and that's that is available to the public, and really tries to make it easy for the public to pull together all related stats on particular areas, and to drive further use of data in on the housing areas. So the data here covers housing supply, home ownership, devolution statistics, and statistics on all areas of MHCLG policy. So I'm going to go back into the presentation now. And I'll tell you a little bit about how we created the dashboard. So we basically, it's important to point out that we worked with Swirl, which is an external contractor, and they've developed the Open Data Communities platform for us, and they've also created the online dashboard as well, and they've created software called Publish My Data, which is a system for publishing local, regional, national government statistics, and so I don't have that much detailed knowledge about what kind of coding and tools they used, but I think they use Sparkle. Well, Sparkle code is used quite a lot in open data communities to extract information such as metadata on the statistics, and I think I think the decision was made that we didn't have sufficient resource to produce the dashboards ourselves. So that's we do have data data scientists in the team. So I guess we'll be working towards increasing their capacity in future, and maybe try and take on board these kind of projects ourselves. And so we worked with our data analysis and statistics team who manage open data communities. So I needed to work with them to ensure that the right data was on open data communities and in the right formats with the right metadata, and that can be quite challenging when you want to make all the data open. It can be quite challenging to get everything right and get the presentation and get the metadata right. So I had to work hard to make sure things were presented correctly for the dashboard, and I needed to align the metrics with the single departmental plan, which has changed quite recently, and so I needed to check that they were consistent with the government's new objectives, with the department's new objectives, and I did a lot of work with statisticians and analysts to check that my presentation was consistent with the published indicators, and so it was conveying the same messages that exist in publications. And so the key outcomes of the tool. So it's been published on the departmental intranet now. So I'm promoting it with the department now, and so basically we're just hoping it will make it easy to use evidence and data in policy making, and so it's easy for colleagues to find a chart, snip it out, put it into a report, and see the latest stats on their areas without having to delve around on different websites or contact their analytical colleagues So it's aiming it to be a one-stop shop for key metrics on the department's policy areas. So the next steps are ensuring that that Open Data Communities remains up to date, and we get the latest stats, and we're going to monitor use and feedback to inform development. We've had some positive feedback so far, and policy colleagues have said it makes it much easier to use statistics and really saves them a lot of time. We want to add the remaining strategic objectives to the dashboard, and add functionality, for instance. So yeah, as I said, you need to use the snipping tool if you want to take a chart out, and there may be better ways to do that. And and I'll look into whether we can make the dashboard public. And whilst all the data is available to the public, it's not necessarily the department's not necessarily happy with showing this format to the wider public. So, but I'll keep asking that question and see what we can do about that. And that's the end of my presentation. Thanks. So if anyone has any questions, then, well, Andy, you probably want to take over now. And
yeah. Okay. Right. Well, that's been very interesting. So we've had four very interesting presentations there from our 5 speakers. I've got one question which somebody's put on the conversation box, which I'll come to in a bit. I'm going to start with a general question, but if anybody else has further questions, then they can type them in the conversation box, and I'll pull them up. I don't know is there a method of people who are on phone only asking questions?
They can unmute themselves.
They can unmute themselves, yeah, and then ask. So I'll maybe ask for that later. I just had a sort of general question, really, because these are all bits of work which are really interesting, actually, and have sort of taken forward the presentation or the development of statistics in your areas. I'm just interested, because we're talking here essentially as the Professional Statisticians Forum, so we're looking at the statisticians as well as the bits of work. I'm interested in what perhaps the most important thing that your management chains or sort of hierarchies in your departments did, which facilitated you being able to do that work. Really, because we've been the GSS generally has been trying to do this sort of thing for on and off for years, and it's nice to see that there's lots of this coming forward now. I'm just interested to know what things you think the management chains either did or could do, which makes this sort of stuff come forward better. Does anyone want to start with that one?
McAlpine here. I would say the thing that my manager did and the management team that were behind me was empower me to go and make the changes and be bold and do something different. So I think the empowerment and being entitled to go and do changes, that then sent a level of responsibility on me that if I was going to take changes, I said I moved away from a 140-page document to a 16-page document. That's a big change. I needed to make sure that I contacted all my users, that I'd spoken to them properly, that I had a good basis on which I was going to make those changes. And so I think just that kind of empowerment and trust in the statisticians to go and do good work, because I think there's a lot of statisticians who do want to do good work. I speak to a lot of young statisticians coming into Scottish Government, and quite often they've come in with wonderful ideas, but after a couple of years it's almost been suppressed, and you get that sense of, well, that's not how we do things around here. And if there's anybody young who is thinking about going into government, challenge that, because that's how we'll make better changes.
Yeah, completely echo that. It is absolutely begins with sort of, in my case, head of profession, sort of empowering us to go out and take a risk with our sort of publication, as it works. It's very easy to fall into the trap of sort of turn the handle and get another publication out. We're all up against it in terms of time and resources to actually commit to doing that, and then sort of learning was delivered. And say we did have to make a case to the relevant people, to sort of our comms community and stuff like that, which is why sort of the GSS perspective, that sort of cross-government group is really handy, because that's how we get our sort of audience insight that's been tested in something that's got more resources than we possibly have in their sort of testing lab down in Newport, no ONS, which we simply don't have in HSE. There's a handful of us in the department demonstrating the fact that this is proven to work, this has the sort of the impact we want, getting them on board, and then it's working with sort of colleagues in the department to sort of filter out that good practice and the fact that, again, that this is something we can get behind and believe in, and then delivering on it. So yeah, it absolutely begins at the top, I think. So that willingness to challenge, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I think I'd agree from a DWP perspective. We've really been given the resource and time.
Yeah, I think we've been challenged to be innovative and sort of go down that road, try different things. Some of the things we've tried didn't work, but I think we've focused on trying to get things out there, like some of the maps, some of the dashboards might not be perfect, we're not web developers, but we've been able to go back and show senior managers, and I think we've got a lot of buy-in because they've seen things and, well, actually, yeah, that is the direction we want to go in.
I think you're right. I think having the space to fail is crucial to having something that you can innovate with.
Yeah, and getting things out quickly. So we've been like working on prototypes and getting it in front of the senior managers, and it might not be, like Matt said, it might not be perfect, but getting the buy-in sooner rather than later has sort of been key to us, because we know quite quickly whether we should invest more time in it or not. I'd also say that we've been working quite closely with our data scientists as well, because they've got a lot of expertise in the area, so they're sort of helping us with the sort of skill sets that we need to rapidly develop to do these things quickly.
Yeah, from MHCLG's perspective, yeah, it was great to get that buy-in from our lead analyst to fund the project and create an innovative way of presenting data. But it has been it was challenging finding the resource to keep the open data platform updated, and I think that there was prioritization had to be done for our standard publications, so we had to be quite patient that until we could get the resource to maintain the open data platform. So I think that's a balance that you need to keep an eye on.
I think as well it's raising the bar as well, because I've seen some of your publications and thought that looks really good. It's sort of things you can learn from, and you can see people investing time in things like this. Sometimes pinch ideas, things like that. So yeah, if other people are doing it, I think it encourages more people to sort of pick up these types of things.
And I think the profession as a whole is getting better at being willing to share with one another and sort of good practice. I mean, GSS is doing a great job, I think, of sort of coordinating that, and obviously such as that sort of RSS events like this one. Plug.
And we had a publication out last month that took some of the ideas from your HSE stuff, and we've kicked it on a little bit further as well. And I think if as a mass of government statisticians, if we keep doing that, we'll end up improving and becoming leaders in how you present statistics.
Oh, that's good. Anyway, so it sounds like there's lots of ideas, and a lot of it is about encouragement and empowerment and helping people to find resources and that sort of thing. But certainly getting ideas from other people and discussing them is a good way forward as well. We'd had a question. Somebody was asking that one of the purposes of this, I suppose, of presenting your statistics better is to facilitate policy development by making the statistics easier to find and to use, and therefore giving them more impact. You're all at various different stages of development, but have you or are you thinking of how you would evaluate whether these changes have had the impact on that sort of area that you would perhaps be hoping for? On the sort of, has this made the statistics more effective?
starting off with this IMD again,
Yeah.
just go round the table. I think we didn't measure it, but we saw an uptake from policy and wanting to use SIMD. And I think, as I said, I've moved to agriculture, and so it's a different field, if you like. But I need to go back and speak to the policy people and really drag them along to the evidence and say, here it is. So I suppose working where I was before with poverty, the policy people were very evidence focused. So it was almost like pushing against an open door there a bit, and so that wasn't that difficult. It's difficult. How do you measure your impact on policy? You can measure it through, how much financial contribution is then based on evidence, or is it the impact that it has on people's lives? It's a very difficult thing to really monitor. And that's why I kind of spoke about the conversation. If you can change the conversation with the use of evidence, so we're moving the conversation away from being about housing, solving all deprivation problems, to thinking about all the other aspects, then for me that was a big win as well.
I mean, it's going to vary depending on the area. We have a very sort of engaged policy profession, because we're sort of, a lot of our policy colleagues are divided up by sector, because we've got a very strong industry component, and certainly we've got industry leads who are working directly with them. I don't know, because I've not been in long enough to say if that relationship has changed in recent years or anything like that, but certainly they're proactive in seeking advice from statistics, which is, as I say, it's exactly what we want to be doing, is informing evidence-led decision making at the end of the day. So yeah, in terms of wider impact, we can sort of get tangential measures of reach by that sort of user feedback and that sort of thing. It's a very difficult thing to pin down, I think, in terms of once it leaves the building. It's just a case of sharing. Again, it comes back to sharing good practice and what works, and when people have got the resource to do that sort of audience engagement and sort of adopting that, as far as I'm concerned. So.
We've all talked about how busy we are and trying to find space. Our policy colleagues are exactly the same. They're overstretched all the time. So the more that we can do here as a group of statisticians to remove the barriers to them being able to get that data, the more chance we have of making that impact.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious way of the most obvious way is, I think, is to monitor site visits, which will show you whether our tool is being used or not. But then I suppose we as everyone does, we'll rely on user feedback, and maybe we'll send out surveys in future and try and estimate how many documents have been informed by the dashboard, or how many decisions, or that kind of thing. I worked on the IMD in DCLG before, and I asked our internal comms to calculate the number of web hits that they got, and it was like sort of like the second biggest in government or something. I'm sure Scotland is very high too, and someone's done work on estimating how many billions of pounds have been allocated using stats. So I guess that just requires a bit of legwork from someone, but that would be useful to know.
Yeah, it's very easy to sort of fall down that trap of web traffic as sort of measure, I think. That was just a case of, has anyone actually taken an action from that, or is it a case of they've gone, oh, right, I don't care about stuff.
Yeah, wrong website.
Yeah, so again, that's where you get the benefit of working with colleagues across the sort of organisation and beyond, is the fact that they'll have an understanding of that I simply don't, and they'll be able to give me a little bit more information about what that actually means in real time. So yeah, that's...
Anything or?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's been good, similar sort of things. I mean, we monitor things like web traffic, but yeah, that's only one part of the story. We can see what tables people are accessing. Difficult then to link it at what they're accessing it for. We can monitor who's accessing it, so is it an external? What local authorities use our data, what internal analysts. But that's the sort of next steps for us, I think, understanding more of that sort of relationship, who's using our data and why.
I think from a sort of an internal perspective, we've had really good feedback from sort of our policy colleagues in terms of sort of influencing the political debate. So in particular, the maps that we showed that got a really good policy response, and they actually decided to sort of use that as a tool to show how universal credit was rolling out across the country. So instead of it being just used as a statistical tool, they wanted to actually have a more of an operational
thing,
yeah. So we found that actually we've had even wider benefits than just our stats.
Another question that was asked, it's on a slightly different topic, is around the skill sets that are needed for, these sort of areas going forward. And I mean, you all, at least on the face of it, look to have been through the education system somewhat more recently than I. But somebody was asking whether there needed to be any changes to statistics degrees or that sort of thing to include some of these presentation methods or the sort of data analytic stuff underpinning some of the presentation methods, and whether that was helpful.
I think presentation methods it's good for statisticians to have that kind of basis. At the same time, I do feel like we shouldn't try to become graphic designers, because that's a different profession, and so we need to employ those people to do that. In terms of my own statistics degree, I think that and possibly this has already happened because the world has moved on in the last 13 years, but the advent of big data and the way that is really impacting now is going to have a massive effect going forward in government. And I think that then starts to bring in a multi-skilled teams as well, where you've talked about having data scientists, and you need a web publishing team, you need the statisticians there to validate the official statistics part, you need economists to help you make sure that you're telling the right stories. And so I think as we move forward, I don't think statisticians should shy away from doing what we do best, which is telling the statistics accurately, but I think we need to work much closer with our other professionals, colleagues in government.
You want to add anything to?
I think you nailed it. Multidisciplinary team is exactly what I want to hear. I mean, there's a lot of times people around government, and the idea of them working in silos is really quite depressing, when ultimately we can be more effective and we all team up, as say. Our publication, we had a graphic designer, as you mentioned, attached to that, who we just fleshed out in Excel, but Excel's only going to take it so far, it's not going to produce what we had. So
maybe the education point which may be happening is making sure that people know what sort of other skills are out there.
Yeah, just the overriding principle of a statistic you produce that no one looks at is basically useless. Get that message across, and then let graphic designers crack on with it, I think.
Data journalism as well. That's one of the things that we found, that a lot of the time we were putting stats out, and whatever, BBC or whoever were taking our data and telling their own story, or making their own charts, or making their own maps. Whereas now we've sort of tried to turn that around. People can just lift our stats, so telling the story in a more sort of journalistic way, sort of inverted pyramid.
Starting
you get the big stories on the top is how sort of journalists would write that.
I think you're absolutely on the button there. I think if there's, I'll correct myself from what I said earlier. Yes, statisticians need to change. We need to think about selling the story, the narrative, and not trying to. I mean, we always talk about, we put every statistic that we can in our publications. Actually, what is the story? And we need to be brave and bold and take the risk to tell that story. And if we get it wrong, journalists will come back and challenge us, and they'll hold us up. But I think that's the scrutiny that we need as well.
Because sort of historically, that's what we'd have done. We put the data out there, and then you decide what the story is. Whereas I think we're closer to the data and tell that story.
At the end of the day, a journalist, how many articles is he contractually obliged to put out in a day? If your story is too sort of buried under everything else, it's not going to get the attention, because they simply don't have time. That's what we're saying about building stuff that can be easily shared, and they can cut it out. We've done that off the job for them. So.
And the inverted pyramid way of telling the story, starting with the conclusions and then working your way down to explaining the methodology, is absolutely the way. And if anybody wants to know more about that, then the one that I sell to my team is the United Nations writing statistics well, I can't remember the name of the publication, but it's Writing Statistics as Journalists or something like that. It's a United Nations publication.
To look at then. A final question I think it'll have to be, because we're nearly out of time, but somebody was asking about whether the new GDPR regulation, I think they were particularly concerned about the sort of detailed data for expert users. I mean, some of what we've been talking about here is the more high level stuff, but I'm just wondering about whether those of you that are dealing with the more detailed stuff, whether that's something that's you know, of a concern to you with what you do at the moment, or whether it's just something that will have to be looked at or has been looked at.
Yeah, I mean, from the main sort of tool for us at DWP to put our stats out is Stat Exploit. So it allows users to sort of create their own tables and drill down to quite a low level of information, down to census output areas, break that down by age, gender, whatever breakdowns you can sort of dream up. But that includes a sort of inbuilt disclosure control function. That was a sort of, before we did anything else, that was the sort of thing that we had to have. So from that side of it, I think we're sort of covered in the GDPR world. One of the things that we have got to look at is that as what we're trying to encourage people to do is register for Stat Exploit, so we can get some of this user analysis. But that then automatically puts them on an email list, so we have to think about opt-out clauses and things like that. But that's slightly different.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's obviously an issue, but not perhaps the main topic of this discussion.
I think the expert users that are coming in using government data, if you're wanting that sort of individual record data, then there's safe havens and there's processes that you can go down to still get access to that. And at the same time, GDPR is coming in next week, and we're going to make mistakes, and it's going to have limitations on the expert users, and we'll learn from those mistakes and we'll move on. And I think it'll come down to how well the privacy notice has been written to think about the expert user as well, so that it's explained when you're collecting that data that might be something that you want to do. And then it also comes down to the fact of, do you have legislation behind you to be able to share that with expert users, or whether you're going to need the consent of the individual. So if you're either a statistician in government, and you should be thinking about that, and if you're a user of government data, I would be going and speaking to the statistician and saying, are you thinking about me, the academic that needs this data in 3-4 years time, and how are you incorporating our needs in privacy notices?
Well, I think we're going to now have to wrap this up now, because we've reached the end of our slot. Thank you very much indeed to our speakers, Alan McAlpine from Scottish Government, Laura Watson-Hurd and Mark Burley from DWP, Ian Polanowski from the Health and Safety Executive, and Rob Green from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So we've had 4 very interesting talks there from our 5 speakers, and I hope you've enjoyed it and enjoyed the discussion. The slides are on the RSS website. It's possible that 1 or 2 minor changes may be made to them, and we'll put those up as soon as possible, if so. My name's been Andy Sutherland. I've been chairing this meeting. I'm an ex-GSS head of profession, for anybody who's interested in that sort of thing. I've enjoyed the meeting. I hope you have too. Thank you and goodbye.